This is what the first practice session for the first round of the 1982 Formula 1 season looked like. No drivers. Where were they? This is the drivers' strike of 1982. In January 1982, Niki Lauda was about to begin his first season with McLaren after a 2-year hiatus. In the post, he received a form to apply for his super license, enabling him to go racing, but this one was slightly different from before, and one that would start a whole chain of events. He noticed the following: I am committed to the above team to drive exclusively for them in the FIA Formula 1 World Championship. The form was no longer issued to just the driver, but now the team as well, so if the driver left the team, he wouldn't be able to drive at all. It also confirmed that he would be there for a fixed number of years. This new addition to the super license could give teams the power to transfer drivers between teams, without them having a say in the matter, or the financials. I will do nothing which might harm the moral or material interests or image of international motorsport or the FIA Formula 1 World Championship. What constituted moral harm, and who decided the parameters for this? With this point being so open, other than some wording referring to drivers taking no action in the event of a dispute, other than the procedures set out in the International Sporting Code, this was in effect silencing drivers, but without setting out the terms. There was no way I was going to sign that form, and I managed to persuade Pironi that we should all get together and do something about it. Of all the drivers, 24 signed the contract and 6 didn't. Most probably didn't know exactly the ramifications of what they were signing. Others may not have understood because the form was in English. On Wednesday, Niki Lauda and Didier Pironi, the president of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, attended a meeting with FISA and FOCA to air the drivers' concerns. FISA was the Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile, a branch of the FIA delegated to running the sporting regulations governing Formula 1. FISA was led at the time by Jean Balestre. FOCA was the Formula 1 Constructors Association, a union of sorts to represent teams in the championship, mainly British. It was chaired by Bernie Ecclestone, who happened to also run his own team, Brabham. FOCA and FISA rarely saw eye to eye, and this was during a time now known as the FISA-FOCA War, so tensions between the concerned parties were already somewhat fraught, but on this occasion Balestre and Ecclestone were in agreement. FISA President Balestre and Ecclestone had teamed up to show us who was really in charge. We had a choice, it appeared: accept the conditions as set out, or go to hell. At a meeting of the drivers, it was established that with the exception of Jackie Ickx and Jochen Mass, we were all in favour of holding out. It was decided that we would call a strike and boycott Thursday practice. On Thursday at 7 AM, Lauda and Pironi strongly convinced the drivers to board a bus they had hired. The bus went to the Sunnyside Hotel in Johannesburg, followed of course by the press, in numbers. I very nearly didn't get on that bus because I thought the whole thing was bloody stupid, and I could smell something wasn't right, but once you were on, you were on. Lauda and Pironi had planned it all that way. That whole weekend Pironi behaved like it was the big weekend of his life. We potted around the swimming pool and had a really splendid day. Any anxieties were camouflaged by hijinks and laughter, although even long-serving drivers knew that the consequences could be drastic. Back at the track, the race organiser was beginning to feel the pressure.
Total anxiety and anger, because here we are again with a situation, everything's gone so smoothly up until this point, and now we're in a situation which is, I vowed and promised never to get back into again, on, off, and, it's just mind-boggling.
The team managers, perhaps a little bewildered by what had happened, were more bullish that it would all be resolved. I believe that these people will act a little bit like children. I think they'll go away and decide in fact that they were in the wrong, and they'll come back and drive as they should be driving. I think you'll find they'll all turn up quite shortly and get on with their business. As time went by with no sign of the drivers returning and practice sessions due to begin, attitudes started to shift.
The law is the same for everybody. They must respect the law, also when they are professional driver, and I can say more because they are professional.
I've got a contract to say they'll drive in this event. If they don't, they'll be in breach of contract, and that'll be the end of their contract. As far as I'm concerned, if they're not here within a reasonable time to practice these two cars for this Grand Prix, they won't be driving for Brabham anymore. Pironi remained at the track to negotiate and spoke to Lauda and the other drivers at the hotel by phone. By late afternoon, a release came out explaining that the practice sessions were not held due to the driver's absence. It also said that the drivers' licences were now suspended due to violating various sporting code articles. Day was turning to night, and in order to keep a united front, the drivers arranged to sleep in the conference suite at the hotel, with a bathroom just outside it. They brought in sheets and mattresses and set them up on the floor. Considering the context of their situation, the drivers enjoyed being together in such strange circumstances. That night, Elio De Angelis played the piano, Mozart I think, and Gilles played Scott Joplin. The best thing about it was that for once all the drivers got along well together. You know what was fantastic? I got to know my colleagues for the first time, because being a non-qualifier at the back of the grid, you don't get a chance to speak to the guys at the front. The piano even served as comedic relief. Gilles Villeneuve played Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to introduce Didier Pironi's updates from negotiations. However, things started to get tense when Arrow's team manager Jackie Oliver came to the hotel. He had a local roughneck with him and tried to force his way in. He had even brought the police along, and we had to be very careful to avoid a brawl, which would have given them an excuse to step in. They got the door half open and were nearly inside before we pushed them out again, using the piano to block the door. That night one of the drivers went to use the bathroom, but didn't return. Teo Fabi had decided he wanted out of the strike. Keke Rosberg recalls when they discovered Teo had deserted. He lost our respect forever, not because he decided to leave, but because he betrayed us. He went straight to Eccleston and Balestra and told them everything we discussed. Teo would later reflect on the matter. It was a very difficult position to be in at the first race because I might have lost my career before it had begun. My decision caused a lot of problems in my relations with the other drivers for at least 1 year or even longer, but it was the only decision I could take. On Friday morning, with no signs of an agreement being made, some teams started to look around for replacement drivers. Formula 2 champion Brian Henton was offered such a role. There's been several people offer me drives in the cars for just a couple of sessions, but just to get in a car for an afternoon with all the controversy about, I just don't think it's worth it. Even James Hunt joked about returning.
Well, I've got 31 cars to choose from at the moment. I'm the only driver here who hasn't got to sign anything.
March driver Jochen Mass turned up to the track. He was asked for his views on the strike, being one of the few to abstain. I'm with the drivers. I expressed that I would drive because I basically think we overreacted on the issue, but that's my personal opinion about it. And I'm prepared to drive if there's some action this morning, but I will obviously support the majority of the drivers. I just think we should perhaps handle the affairs slightly different. Of course, circumstances leave sometimes only one weapon, which is a strike, but I personally still think we've gone a little bit too far. In order to move the race forwards, Balestra, Ecclestone, the race organisers, some of the teams and Pironi agreed to a truce, although only verbally, and none of the drivers would be punished. The drivers could return to get the race back on track. Ecclestone, seemingly not following through with firing his drivers, took revenge on his driver Nelson Piquet, the reigning champion, by removing the number 1 from his car and applying a number 2 to all 3 of the chassis. He even refused to allow Piquet to participate in practice, saying he looked too tired, and he wouldn't even let him participate in qualifying until he had a medical. Piquet's first laps in a car were during qualifying, still able to achieve second place behind René Arnoux. The race ran on the Saturday and saw Alain Prost take victory after overcoming a puncture earlier in the race. The celebrations were short-lived, however, as following the race, all the drivers' licences were suspended. They were fined and faced race bans. A tribunal followed shortly after, in which the FIA criticised fees of Balestra and the drivers. All drivers' fines were reduced to $5,000, still a sign that they needed to be punished, and race bans were suspended, but would be enforced if drivers misbehaved again. The super license form returned to its previous version, without the controversial lines that started the whole strike. An order was restored, for now. So did anyone win from this? Short term, yes, because the drivers managed to revert their super license back to an agreed version, but was it the best way to go about it? We had the drivers' strike, which in my opinion was completely disgusting. We should have found other means to get our due rights, even against Bernie. The strike may have resulted in a temporary course correction to go forwards from, but it exposed many weaknesses in sporting and business attitudes at the time in Formula 1, and the FISA FOCA war would rumble on. See you on the next lap.